Welcome to Tony at 12. Today's guest is Professor Michael Mainelli, late Sheriff of the City of London. We're in conversation regarding Michael's days as one of the sheriffs of the Corporation of the City of London. And we're also going to talk about the post-pandemic recovery in the city. Michael, as ever, great pleasure to see you, and you're looking well.
Well, a delight to be here, Tony. It's always fun to chat with you, and always fun to reconnect with Alderney.
Yeah. Well, you are a great fan of Alderney, that we know, definitely. Before we get into the nitty gritty, Michael, can you just remind our viewers of the position of sheriff in terms
Yeah.
of how that works?
Well, the City of London has elected two sheriffs since approximately 640 AD. And obviously, history at that era is quite foggy. Um, but it came about largely because the citizenry were trying to emulate, we believe, the Roman system of two consuls who would step down after a year, and therefore they couldn't be tyrants because they were keeping an eye on each other and would have to reside among the general population. So it's arguably the oldest elected position in the world, or secular elected position. I suspect the Catholic Church has a beat. And there was a small period from 1067 to 1132 where they weren't elected, but it's quite intriguing. The corporation itself considers itself the oldest elected democracy in the world, although folks in the Isle of Man sometimes contest that. But we're talking about venerable institutions dating democratically back to the 9th century, and in the case of sheriff, back to the 7th century. So a very old position. It's there to do three things: defense of the city, and that's why we still have a police force and things. It's there to do taxation, although that's quite vestigial these days for the sheriffs. The corporation obviously collects nearly £1 billion in taxes. And then thirdly, it's responsible for the administration of justice, which again principally means you have you're chairing, the two of you, the law courts, the central criminal courts, which are referred to as the Old Bailey, which can be a bit funny because you do reside there, believe it or not, with your spouse if you so wish. And I must say, Elizabeth and I had a sort of a standing joke, which ran along lines of, hi, honey, I'm home, 18 courts, 74 jail cells, 400,000 square feet of office space, 2 cabinets of medieval torture equipment.
Oh, really?
And no television. What do you want to do tonight, honey?
So, yeah. So the thing is that you were elected in 2019, okay? But little did you know that you were going to go for a record long stint of 2 years because of COVID. What can I say? Do you now hold a record, Michael, on that?
Unfortunately, given the length of memory that the city has, not quite. My brother Sheriff Chris Hayward and his wife Alex were also with us, and Chris, in fact, just last week became chairman of policy and resources of the corporation, which is kind of, notwithstanding the Lord Mayor, the most important position in the city. But the two of us, I dug back into the records and found there had been another a double Shrivel year in 1228. So
right, okay.
We don't quite hold the record.
So it appears to happen every 1,000 years.
Yeah, about that. It's a bit frequent, but we hope to suppress it.
So, despite COVID, you actually and your fellow sheriff had to be present at the Old Bailey during that period of time. There wasn't that much activity, though, was there, in terms of the criminal court, or was there?
Au contraire. One of the outstanding elements of the pandemic in terms of performance was actually the Old Bailey itself, widely reckoned to be the best run court in the land. And we were running at, I don't have the numbers to hand, but about 65 to 70% capacity throughout. We were in the process of changing recorders to the current recorder, Mark Lucraft. Mark and the team were great at working. Chris and I were really overseeing, but a lot of decisions were made very, very swiftly. For example, in February, we had ordered PPE equipment when others perhaps hadn't. We had already cordoned things off. We'd installed hand sanitizers. There was a lingering project to effectively connect the courtrooms, which was important because it allowed us to increase separation distance. And that project was running a couple of years late, and we got it done in 6 weeks. And then we doubled up the courts effectively. So we went from 18 courts, which, if you think about it, weren't fully utilized anyway, to effectively 9 courts where we had these double courts. And we were able to separate out, for example, the press and some of the onlookers from from the defendants and from the jury and the barristers. So the whole thing was spread out across it, and that's why we were able to run at 2/3 to 3/4 capacity throughout. It was, in fact, we were complimented in a couple of the legal magazines and newspapers on being the best prepared court in the land, and I found that a source of some pride for all of us as a team,
Very much
because
so.
we are the only privately run court in the land.
Mm. So were the public allowed in, or presumably during the lockdown period they weren't even allowed out of their houses? But what was there some public participation in the galleries, or?
Um, there were a couple of occasions when, in fact, the public galleries were closed unless you had a real reason to be there, in
Yeah.
which case you would have come into the court anyway. But no, the public galleries opened as soon as possible. Again, subject to a lot of separation distances, so it was quite a bit down. I don't want to make light of it,
Yeah.
but there were some real improvements. I mean, for years, people have said that the criminal justice system would be the hardest to reform, and that obviously, as is well known, commercial lawyers were full of change and innovation. In reality, the ability to use the video conferencing provided a lot of change, good change. So, for example, those awaiting trial were able, if they so wished, to dial in remotely. Now, you might find that sounds a bit funny, but there are many procedural elements to a trial.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be handcuffed, walked in, unhandcuffed, brought to your jail cell to go up and watch. You're not being asked to do anything. Your lawyers are talking for 5 minutes about scheduling something, and then you go back and sit in the cell until they take you home.
Sure.
So that was one thing. And we were able to extend a little bit, particularly for the vulnerable and the young. And that was something in train anyway, but nevertheless, we were able to extend the idea of video conferencing for their statements and things. So it's been a positive move, oddly, for the criminal justice system in terms of its ability to use new technology. On the other hand, there have been some other problems, particularly with backlog.
Yeah, sure. When we spoke about your appointment back in 2019, one of the matters that you really wanted to address was some rule of law reform. Did you get very far on that one, or?
Well, like all things, events dear boy events. So COVID derailed maybe some of the energy, but we did achieve a fair bit. One of the things that I was focused on was anti-money laundering. I wanted to strengthen and simplify anti-money laundering. And now, what can I do in that regard? A lot of it's about interpretation by lawyers, by accountants, by financial services firms. And so the most that we could do would be to highlight the issue. But in fact, we succeeded in having a couple of large events, one in the Old Bailey attended by, I think it was about 180 people, promoting the idea that it was our interpretation as opposed to the legislation that needed to be altered. The Law Society came in and supported us, and we had a further 8 events on our anti-money laundering task force amongst delivery companies. How much of a success was it? There were a couple of things that I do know that the government is looking at quite seriously. For example, fixed fines as opposed to politically variable fines, and looking at encouraging more competition in the speed of clearing people for new accounts. But I wouldn't claim it was a revolution.
No. Okay. Obviously, looking at the UK situation in general, it seems that an awful lot of criminal cases are taking a long time to actually get to court. At the Old Bailey, you obviously were doing pretty well in terms of moving cases through, but there's no quick fix on this, is there?
No, there isn't, and I think that a lot of the quick fixes that are being spoken about are potentially quite dangerous. For example, removing it's personal, by the way. I'm not in office any longer, but removing jury trials for fraud cases, for example, fills me with some unease. And in fact, one of the things I would say is that in my various dealings with the judges, their admiration of the jury system is very high.
Yeah.
They believe juries broadly get the right answer. So there were a lot of good things there. Anyway, on cases and length of time, yes, it was already running at just around the 2-year mark before COVID hit. So we had a backlog problem. And as I try to remind people, a sixth of them turn out to be innocent, and that could be you.
Yeah,
So
quite.
you were in jail for 2 years, and you're bleating about your innocence, and nobody seems to be moving very fast.
Yeah.
It's now 3 years, as is well known, and it is genuinely, and I rarely say this, it's genuinely a resources problem. Um, I think there are a couple of other things that could be done to improve the efficiency. There are a lot of procedural elements that could perhaps be tidied up, but by and large, the Ministry of Justice is starved at this level. We could look a little bit wider. I spent a bit of time comparing the UK with, in particular, Norway. There are some other countries as well, but Norway is particularly interesting because on a per capita basis, they spend about twice as much per prisoner in the entire system. But they spend, believe it or not, because they have so many fewer people, only about 3,000 people out of, I think, 6 million are incarcerated in Norway. So it's a really different system, which is trying to reduce recidivism, bring people back into the community, blah, blah, blah. But it would require us looking at our criminal justice system, where we tend to look not at rehabilitation, we tend to look at punishment. We tend to have excruciatingly long sentences. So, somebody who's gone in at the age of, say, 18 and received a minimum 21-year sentence for murder, their life is
middle-aged when they come out.
Yeah, I kind of want to say destroyed.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, in the Nordics, you can do that in 6 or 7 years. We would see that as not appropriate, but that's going to require a societal change. And until that happens, this very slow, antiquated, creaky system that's underfunded is going to have backlogs.
With Norway, what was their reoffending rate like? Is it, but by being comparatively lenient in their outlook, are they sort of able to rehabilitate people and get to a point where, people don't offend again?
It's that lower recidivism rate that starts to make them the big savings there.
Yeah.
But they've got we could go into this at length, but it is a very different system. For example, everything is under one roof. So the parole is there, the jail is there, the prison is there, and the rehabilitation group are there. What that means is, I mean, take for example here, as a prisoner, you do something bad, we remove your education rights. They're like, you're not getting out of class because of that. My job is to get you back into society and back into a job. Another example in the Norwegian case is that because the jailer has control of parole, your good behavior with them helps you with your parole much more than it does under our system, where you've been a really good prisoner, Tony, but who knows what the parole board's going to say. So they've got a kind of an ultra managed system. It's difficult as well. My perception comes from time at the Old Bailey, where we really only hear the most grievous cases of murder and rape and terrorism. For us, fraud is kind of light relief. So I did see it. Whereas what you really talk about when you're looking at recidivism, it's not those crimes, but you're really looking at the bulk of burglary and assault. And that's what you want to do, and that's where the Norwegians are very focused on reducing recidivism.
So John Timpson is famous for employing ex-convicts. Do you think a few more employers should, take that sort of view?
Definitely. I'm a great admirer of John's work and have met him and think he's just wonderful. And he's also, I think, showed something remarkable. Remember, these ex-cons are cutting keys.
Yes.
I mean, what else? So no, I think there's a lot more that employers could do.
Yeah.
It's an undertapped resource if you're willing to go through it. But there are many currents in society that cut the other way. I mean, in the United Kingdom at the moment, I think that the amount is £46. In fact, my brother Sheriff Chris went on a charity drive where he lost £46 of weight. But £46 is what you're given. So you're kicked out the door, you're given £46. If you're somewhat out of town, you're probably £15 down on the taxi just to get somewhere. And we expect you to reintegrate into society. We're not doing a good job. I did come away bluntly, as somebody who went into it as a city role. I came out of it as a bit of a fervent supporter of reform in the penal system. In fact, I myself went and raised money by riding around the city on a horse, but it did raise quite a bit of sums. In fact, Chris and I, between us, We believe we raised about £150,000. But that's just a drop in the ocean to the real reform that's needed.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you've got to give somebody coming out of prison a fair chance. And if you just give them £46 and say bye-bye, it's little wonder that they can easily lapse back into reoffending, I guess.
They can't even open a bank account. And
No,
then, of course,
quite. Yeah.
everything's digital, and they're given £46. The very first thing they do is they can't purchase something on a touchless area or something, and they're hungry, and what are they going to do next? And the following day they're arraigned. It's not a good system at all.
They need a better transition. No
We
doubt
need
about
to
it.
be a fairer society.
Yeah.
We like to style ourselves as a wealthy society. Well, then we should be, I think, caring for the underprivileged in all cases, and frankly, ex-cons are underprivileged in that regard.
Leaving the Old Bailey and looking at the corporation of the City of London in general, how did it cope with lockdown? Was it fairly satisfactory the way everything continued to operate?
Well, the straight answer is yes. In fact, lockdown in many ways only exacerbated trends that were already there. I like to point out to people, we've been seeing interesting changes in commuting figures anyway. Business travel in Scandinavia in 2019 dropped by 8%. If that had dropped in 2020 by 8%, we'd be saying, my gosh, 8% one year, 8% the next, 16% down. Wow, this is amazing. Instead, of course, it went down 80% in 2020, so we kind of missed it. But these changes were already underway. So the city, which is largely technology and financial firms, had very little difficulty switching to doing things from home. And did so. And I'm here in my office at home, and I see the city out that window, and Canary Wharf is out that one. And they were pretty black for really the last almost 2 years. So the city had no problems. The geographic city, of course, has had a torrid time. And that's because we went from 525,000 workers coming in to well under 100,000. And I think at the moment, I think our best day we've hit has been about 60, about 300,000. So just around the 60% mark. So there's been a permanent change, in my opinion. Other people talk about a return to normal. I began writing about what we needed to do almost 2 years ago on the prediction that we would probably be down a permanent 20%, and that we needed to find new and innovative ways of bringing people into the city for other purposes. Most importantly, I think we should be trying to lengthen the business visits. So if we could just move the people who are 4 to 7 days visitors to 8 to 11 day visitors, only 20% of them to move, we could actually fill in almost all of that gap. So I think that the real things that we need to do to galvanize the city, and we're talking about it. I mentioned that Chris has become the chair of policy and resources, and he has a new program, a new plan, which he's launching on Thursday at Common Council. And it's all designed to reinvigorate and change a city that has always been in a state of change.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a continually evolving place, as we all know. As far as working from home is concerned, there has been government criticism recently, as far as the civil service is concerned, in terms of certain days seem to appeal more than others in terms of taking the time off. Very difficult to monitor people, isn't it, when they're working from home?
Oh, well, actually, some firms do. I mean, surveillance equipment is legendary in many of the firms. JP Morgan is constantly cited as somebody who uses surveillance equipment on who you're talking to, et cetera. There's a requirement, strictly only really on the trading floors, but to record your conversations in case you're providing insider information. So a lot of this has been going on. More importantly, I think I'm working from home. The phrase that's risen is that people seem to be focused on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. You can choose the value you'd like to insert to make that. I prefer twit, but people do use other ones. And there's been a lot of almost grandstanding. I think some of that was promoted by the Prime Minister, who, in fact, if I recall, I think it was August 2020. Rishi Sunak was bribing us with free meals to go and infect other people, and Boris was telling us we needed to go in and save the sandwich shops of the world. Now, I'm not saying it, I might not have done something similar, but this idea of boosterism, it can only be temporary. People are going
Yeah.
to do what they want to do. And I think working from home has just changed things. When you talk to people, you see all sorts of different things, ranging from best thing that ever happened to, oh my God, I can hardly wait to go back to the office 9 to 5 full time. But it does seem on average to be settling down to about 60 to 80% seems to be the number. Now, I do think we're going to see a number of changes even there. The first is competition is going to alter two things, really. One is your floor space requirements.
Mm.
I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, yes, I come into the office. I'll be in the office on a Monday, but maybe next Thursday." Now, as an employer, and would you like a corporate yacht too, and maybe a chalet?
Yeah,
Because I
absolutely.
can't afford to leave all that space there
No,
if my
quite.
competitors don't. So
Mm.
we're going to, I think, see a shrinking anyway. I mean, now we're at one extreme. We're a research firm, my firm Zien, who compile the various indices. We're down to a quarter of the space that we had 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Lease breaks and all. I just took them, and even now we're still not filling that up. But we are one extreme. At the other extreme, you may need almost all the space, but you're going to be under competitive pressure to release it. The
So,
second,
sorry.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Continue.
the second bit of competition I was just going to say is actually for people.
Yeah.
If you think about it, every job ad that we ever had something implicit underneath it. I want the best people in the world. I want the best lawyers, accountants, programmers, blah, 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 blah. And then we just didn't even bother to write the core assumption.
Yeah.
Who can commute into London.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and now they don't need to be able to commute into London. And firms are finding this tough because they're finding that many of the people they've employed have decided, well, if I'm not really needed in the office, I'm going to go to my chalet, or I'm going to go to the beach house that I bought, or whatever. So that's happening. The clients are saying, I don't care if they're the best people who can commute into London. I want the best people.
Mm.
And so the firms are spreading out, and it might cause a lot of difficulty defining what is a commercial and financial center in the future.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, with the advent of Crossrail, the Elizabeth line coming in, that's going to improve communications into the city quite considerably, isn't it? But do you think they've missed the train?
Ooh, good one there. Well, Crossrail is, I think, what, 4.5 years late, but supposedly it's going to open on the 24th of May, 24th of this month. So it's only
Fingers crossed.
it's a week away. Fingers crossed for Crossrail. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that is a good thing, and of course, it's going to really reduce the time. In my opinion, the biggest thing is the reduction of time to Heathrow.
Yeah.
I'll have to be able to walk up and knock a full hour off my Heathrow trip. This could have some really beneficial effects. Firstly, London was a commuter city that was kind of maxed out. We had people commuting in from, I don't know, Grantham, from Bristol, absurd distances. This will increase that capture zone at a time when we need it. Because the characteristic of London is it's a commuter city. 525,000 people used to drop every single day on one little square mile. The most intense commuting in the world, believe it or not, was that. So we need to increase that commuting distance. And I also think the air connectivity issues are important, as I alluded to earlier.
Yeah.
The idea of increasing international business travel into the city to make it, probably with Singapore, I believe, the global meeting center.
Yes. Yeah, you can see that happening. Now, we touched on money laundering when we were talking about your role as a sheriff, but the Russian oligarchs, was there any regulation actually there? It seems pretty lax to me. And I'll tell you what quite annoys me, Michael, is as a fairly small retired practitioner in financial services, if I took on a new client and they wanted to invest, say, £50,000, I needed to know their blood group, their DNA, everything. And yet it seems that the more money you've got, the easier it is to get away with it.
Yeah. Well, if only you hadn't sold your football club before you retired, Tony, it would have been easier for you. Yeah, it really strikes one of well, basically privilege, unfairness, and hypocrisy. And that was definitely what I was trying to aim at with Chris, was that the anti-money laundering stuff really should be strong, but it should also be simple. if you've presented all of your credentials and you've done, your account should be approved in a day or 15 minutes. I don't care. I mean, why do we have this? And yet we could go on with all the stories. We did collect a tremendous number of horror stories on AML amongst normal people. And I could give you quite a few of my own, but that's not what we're here for. On the other hand, yes, you're right. The ultra wealthy seem to be able to get away with it. I would point out two things. The first is that the role of legal firms in this, and I know that the Law Society and Solicitors Regulator are looking at this quite a bit. How is it that with all of these checks, these seem to continue to go on? I think the second thing is that it leaves a bad taste because a lot of people believe the city couldn't exist without the money laundering that's going on. And I find that, repugnant because I believe it's vibrant without it. I don't see why we tolerate it. However, I would point to, a lot of people don't like to hear this, but back in 91, 92, a number of financial institutions were actually rejecting Russian oligarchs. And certain government officials affiliated with diplomacy came to the city and pressured many of these firms to take on people that they knew or thought they knew were crooks, because it was for the good of the nation to try and integrate Russia. So, it kind of cuts in a number of ways. And I think we as a society need to figure out what we want. And there are some distasteful bits about it. I mean, there are legitimate reasons for secrecy. Do you want your children to have a price tag on their head for kidnapping because you did sell your football club for $500 million? So we've got issues like that. We do want simplicity. We do want fairness. But the goals of society are also to make money and also to attract people, and further, our mores change. We didn't seem to get too upset with Russia when they dropped some polonium on us. I think it was in 2006. And then
Correct.
4 or 5 years ago, when they decided to use Novichok, now they've gone too far. But when is too far? And now we've got issues, of course, with China. I'd like to see some clean rules that separate regimes from individuals, and within the individuals, clarity on the rules of when they've transgressed them and should be subject to sanctions. And then I also want to see clarity and simplicity in the anti-money laundering processes.
That's very interesting. Obviously, the war in Ukraine has had a great effect on energy and food and everything else. How do you see that one going? Do you have any views as to whether or not Ukraine will ultimately be able to see off the Russians?
I think my ability to give military advice is very poor. I would say, though, having been to a few events just in the past week, the general consensus appears to be that the Ukrainian conflict, Ukrainian war, will go on for some time, sadly. That they'll kind of need to drag themselves into a stalemate before they'd actually hit the negotiating table. And that means we need to look at permanent adjustments to supply chains, energy, what have you. That also implies, of course, that we will be seeing this cost of living pressure continue. And that is, of course, terrible in a lot of ways, but it's probably just reality.
Yeah, because I mean, with Ukraine, you've got the inflationary effect on food. I mean, it has always been the breadbasket of Europe, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've got the problems with the EU and Russia over oil and gas.
Yeah, and they're trying to export. They're reduced to trains now. The trains can't handle the volumes that we were used to. Ukrainian production, it's a nightmare. I think one of the other intriguing contra problems I've got has actually got to do with the climate change agenda, where as fuel prices are rising, of course, the government is now looking at ways of ameliorating those price rises, which probably mean favoring fossil fuels, which means that those who've been following the trend to invest in renewables, et cetera, will actually be disadvantaged. And so we see another government policy change in that regard. I think another thing we're having problems with too is some of these sanctions. There was an interesting piece by Keith Boyfield, who I think you might know, about are these sanctions actually changing our notion of property rights, and are we in danger of basically saying everything is controlled by the state? So this is sadly, Ukraine has pricked something that is going to run and run and run in the West. And that's despite all of the horrors and tragedies and injustices going on there.
Thing is, Michael, of course, that energy prices are at an all-time high, but energy's got to be expensive to actually fund decarbonisation, hasn't it?
Correct. And in fact, I've run these numbers and people don't like to hear it. Maybe your viewers will wince, but I can't explain it and go to my website. We're looking at 500 to 1,000 euros or pounds these days per Briton per year for the next 28 years. Those are the sums involved if you want to go net zero carbon. In fact, one of the most exciting things I saw was a proposal I've been working on for 17 years. We started working last year with the Chilean government, and they took our advice and they've issued a policy performance bond. It's a bond in Chile. They've issued it for $2 billion. And it's based on their 2030 targets. So if they fail to meet their 2030 targets, they pay more interest, sort of like an inflation-linked bond.
Yeah.
So it's great. And that kind of attitude really means that we're going to have to face up to it. But those costs are high. And here we see a government wincing at costs that aren't even quite yet approaching that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the government's looking at the situation in 2 years' time when the next general election comes up. And this is surely, Michael, is part of the problem with all of these things. You never get any real long-term planning. It becomes a football that you just kick around for the next election.
Yeah, I've often said, the difficulty in education, the environment, care for the elderly and the disadvantaged, and healthcare. These are all long-term things, or you could throw the prison service into that. These are all things that require long-term approaches. And we in democracies are actually very good at making decisions. We get up every morning and make a different one, and then that prevents that kind of long-term choice. Now, I know this isn't me saying I wish that we had dictators or anything, because there are mechanisms we can use to kind of lock ourselves into decisions. So the policy performance bonds, which Chile issued, are a very good example of that. They can change their mind, but they'll have to pay for it and therefore compensate those who followed the decision that they claimed they were making. So I think these are the sorts of things that we should be looking at. And those decisions should not be made lightly. Otherwise, you will be paying inordinately because you changed direction. But a good example was inflation. I think it was 1982 under the Thatcher government, recognizing that nobody believed anything they were saying. They couldn't get the loans out, and that's it. I think we should be doing more of those types of, let's have a good discussion. Really good, and then lock in on it. And if we change our minds, that's fine, but we need to pay for it.
Yeah, very much so. Let's get on to a happier subject, and that is, of course, the Queen's Platinum celebrations. Is the city doing anything special?
Oh, very much so.
I thought you might.
They range from the fun to the respectful to, frankly, to the reflective. I'll just pick out three. On the 30th of May, we have a toast to Her Majesty, celebrating. It's at 6 o'clock on the 30th of May for anybody who wishes. We're hoping to have the most number of people on an online toast, which, funnily enough, the number is only about 350 that we have to beat. And I think the current estimates are running in the low thousands. So anybody who wishes to look up Toast to Her Majesty on 30th of May, come and join us. It's free, but a tenner to charity wouldn't hurt. Then on the 3rd of June, we have obviously the more formal celebrations in St. Paul's and receptions occurring in the Guildhall. So that will all be there. But then, in fact, there's a very interesting and reflective event on the 24th of September. That Saturday, there's going to be, for the very first time, oddly, I didn't realize this, a flotilla on the Thames in the evening with light and respectfully there. And the palace has approved this one on the basis that it's reflective and quiet. So all sorts of things happening. And we, as you say, it's very uplifting news. And we congratulate Her Majesty on her 70 years on the throne.
Yeah, I'll certainly second that. But finally, the Lord Mayor's role. The sheriff, or one of the sheriffs, is entitled to be, shall we say, promoted to Lord Mayor. Have you thought anything more about that? Or would it be, not the right time to ask?
It's probably not the right time to ask, but for your listeners' sake, yes, to be Lord Mayor, one must be an alderman and have at some time been sheriff. So I have fulfilled both of those criteria, I would like to do the job if asked, but it falls upon my fellow aldermen, and we shall see. But I would love to do it if I was asked to.
So you've ticked the boxes, and you await their comments.
Exactly.
Michael, as ever, it's been a great pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for sparing me some of your time, and hope to meet up with you later on in the year.
Likewise, real honor, Tony. I love these connections. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.